March 7, 1876. In the jagged mountains of northern Ethiopia, the ground shook beneath thousands of marching boots. Egypt's modern army, drilled by Europeans, armed with Remington rifles, marching with iron confidence, entered the valley of Gura, believing Ethiopia would fall as others had before them. But Ethiopia was not like the others. As dawn pierced the mist, a sound rose from the hills, not rifle fire, not the beating of war drums, but the deep, rolling roar of 10,000 Ethiopian warriors, hidden like shadows carved from stone. Egyptian officers looked up, and for the first time, the arrogance in their chests turned cold, because Gura was not a battlefield. It was a trap. The ridges behind them shook with Ethiopian movement. The valley tightened like a noose. And the empire that wanted revenge for Gundet suddenly realized this was the day Egypt's pride would bleed into the dust. This was the day Ras Alula turned strategy into annihilation. This was the day Ethiopia proved that Africa does not kneel. This is the Battle of Gura, the final blow that shattered Egypt's imperial dream. Gura did not begin in 1876. It began 2 years earlier, on the cliffs of Gundet, where Ethiopia crushed an Egyptian invasion with terrifying speed. The defeat shook Cairo like an earthquake. Newspapers mocked the Khedive. European advisors whispered that Egypt had been humiliated by mountain tribes. Ismail Pasha could not let that stand. He rebuilt his army bigger, better equipped, commanded by European officers furious for redemption. They marched with machine-like discipline, confident that Ethiopia's victory at Gundet was a fluke. But Ethiopia remembered everything. Emperor Yohannes IV had not forgotten Egypt's arrogance, its ambition, its attempt to swallow his northern territories. And neither had Ras Alula, the warrior general whose instincts were carved by both battle and betrayal. Gura would not be a meeting of armies. It would be a reckoning. Ras Alula knew Egypt relied on European manuals, European marching formations, European arrogance. He planned to use every one of those weaknesses against them. By February 1876, Egypt had entered the highlands again, this time with 13,000 men, artillery, and the confidence of empire. But Ethiopia waited in silence. The mountains said nothing, and Gura watched. The Egyptians established two massive fortified camps, Gura in the valley and Kayakoras on a nearby rise. Thick stone walls, trenches, artillery platforms. Everything an imperial army would need, or so they thought. But the land itself moved against them. Gura was a bowl, narrow, steep, unforgiving. Too easy to enter, impossible to escape when surrounded. Egyptian commanders laughed at the idea of ambush. To them, Ethiopia's warriors were irregulars, brave, but primitive. They didn't understand that those primitive fighters had defeated them at Gundet, without rifles, without cannons, and without mercy. Meanwhile, Ras Alula's warriors were already in position, hidden along warm ridges, inside deep ravines, behind rocks blackened by centuries of sun. They watched every Egyptian movement, every step, every mistake. Egypt believed they were preparing to attack, but Ethiopia was preparing to destroy. On the dawn of March 7th, Gura exhaled its first warning. Egyptian scouts reported movement on the hills, but officers dismissed it. Then came the second sign, the sudden silence of birds, the faint tremor beneath the soil. And then the mountains exploded. From the ridges, waves of Ethiopian infantry surged down like a living avalanche, shouting, chanting, gripping rifles captured at Gundet, spears wrapped in leather, shields painted with ancient symbols of Tigray and Amhara lineage. Egyptian soldiers scrambled to their positions. Drums pounded in the valley. Bugles screamed orders, but nothing could prepare them. Ethiopian fire came first. Accurate, sharp bursts that tore through Egypt's forward lines. Then came the charge, fast, coordinated, terrifyingly disciplined. Egypt expected chaos. What they received was precision. Ras Alula had transformed his warriors into a storm. Arrows raining from the high ground, flanking units slipping through ravines, shock troops rushing forward like lightning. Egypt fired cannons blindly into the haze. Ethiopia kept coming. Gura had awakened, and it wanted blood. Panicking, Egypt retreated into the Gura fort. But the fort was the trap. Thousands rushed inside, clashing, shouting, stumbling over ammunition crates and fallen comrades. Artillery officers begged for clear lines of fire, but smoke drowned everything. European advisors screamed orders that no one could hear. Ras Alula watched from the ridge, eyes unblinking. He had studied European warfare for years. He knew Egypt would fall back into the fort. He had prepared for this very moment. Ethiopian units divided, surrounding both Egyptian camps. Marksmen picked off sentries on the walls. Shield-bearers advanced in tight formation, closing the distance inch by inch. Egypt fired wildly, cannons shaking the earth, bullets ripping through the air. But nothing broke the Ethiopian advance. Inside the walls, fear spread faster than smoke. Egyptian soldiers saw shadows moving through the haze, heard the war chants growing louder, felt the ground vibrate beneath Ethiopian footsteps. For the first time since the war began, they realized this was not a counterattack. This was extermination. By midday, the battlefield had changed color. Dust and earth darkened by the weight of death. Egypt's elite battalions attempted a breakout, but Ras Alula crushed them with brutal efficiency. He struck from the flanks, from behind, from every possible angle. A masterclass in maneuver warfare, decades ahead of its time. Egyptian officers begged to regroup, but their lines had already dissolved. Some units surrendered, raising their rifles above their heads. Others fled toward Kayakoras, only to be intercepted by Ethiopian cavalry sweeping across the hills. Gura became a nightmare. Egypt's modern army, trained by the best of Europe, fell to warriors who fought with fire in their lungs and their nation in their bones. When Egypt's final attempt collapsed, the valley fell silent. Dust drifted like ashes over the fallen. Broken rifles lay scattered like the bones of metal beasts. The flag of Egypt, once proud, once feared, hung limp against the wind. And Ras Alula stood at the center of it all, breathing slowly, watching an empire crumble. By sunset, the truth could no longer be hidden. Gura was not another battle. It was a funeral, the burial of Egypt's imperial ambition. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers lay dead. Thousands more surrendered. European officers, stunned and ashamed, burned their documents to avoid disgrace. While Cairo entered a silence so deep, it felt like mourning. And Ethiopia? Ethiopia stood unbroken. Ras Alula rode across the quiet valley, his cloak rippling in the cold wind, his warriors chanting prayers of victory and remembrance. This battle this day ensured something far greater than a military win. It protected Ethiopia's sovereignty. It cemented Yohannes IV as a guardian of the highlands. It taught Egypt the same lesson taught at Gundet. You can wound Ethiopia, but you cannot conquer her. And long before Adwa shook the world, long before Menelik crushed Italy's ambition, it was at Gura that Africa saw the proof. When united, Ethiopia was a storm no empire could withstand. The Battle of Gura, the day Egypt fell for the last time, and Ethiopia's roar echoed across the Red Sea.